As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight, one of our favorites, our activist farmer Joel Salatin, co-founder of PolyFace Farms in Virginia, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. Joel, welcome back to Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you, Dunning. It's great to be with you.
We love having you on here because it really gives us some grounded sense of a positive hope and a realistic experience, and kind of breaks us. You know, whenever you break the modern paradigm, it's almost as though you're a heretic, but you're saying things that we know inside already to be true, and it's almost like waking us up from a trance. And it's just so refreshing to go, yeah, that's what common sense. Why am I been having to do the stupid way all the way? So we just so grateful for you here talking to us about ways that we can improve the availability, accessibility, reliability, robustness, integrity, healthfulness of our food supply. As people want to get aware and prepared, they're particularly concerned about food. That's a given. It's one of the number one top priorities on a lot of people's lists. So if you could talk to us about why has local food come to the rescue when people are concerned about the fragility and the brittleness and the risks that are involved in being dependent on the long arm of the supply chain that leads us to our most of our meals in the modern world. What are some considerations that you would like people to think about and open up their minds about steps they can take to bring their food supply local?
Sure. Well, it's a great question, and I think at the top it just needs to be said that no civilization that failed to be able to feed for itself has survived. And I mean, we say that as a civilization, but the same thing as you move down, to a state, to a locality, to a region. Whenever a region, a locality, fails to be able to feed itself, it obviously becomes very, very vulnerable. And we have this idea that our abundant supermarkets are indicative of just, bulging food supply. And they are if everything works smoothly. But, if you think about what it takes to get an item into the grocery store, a lot of things have to fall into place for that chain to occur. Many of the things that we get, of course, are from even foreign countries. And so that requires, obviously, a functioning merchant marine. It makes sure the longshoremen aren't on strike. And of course, this is assuming that the food is, not tainted or not pathogenic or toxic or whatever. And then, it goes into a warehouse. Well, in the warehouse, there are, mountains and mountains of stuff stored with people running around. I mean, even the threat of bioterrorism, of somebody tainting something in these mountains of food sitting there for months, by, being run by forklifts, nameless, faceless people, that then finally go on a truck and go across the country. Depends on, fuel, trucking, workable roads. All those things have to be in place. Finally gets to your grocery store, and of course, all the economy and employment and cash registers and all those things have to be working. So, the interesting thing is that today, I think the general rule is that any given city, any given locality only has 3 days of food on hand. And 3 days in any kind of calamity is actually not very long. And 100 years ago, if I went into your city and said, where's the food? Well, the food would have been in individual larders in homes. It would have been in pantries and root cellars and what was called the larder, which is, where all the dried goods and a ham hanging up and that sort of thing were stored. Today, most people have never even heard the word larder, don't even know what it means, and the food is out at the grocery store.
Sounds like it's bad for your artery system and your heart.
Yeah, larder. Yeah, it sounds like fat, doesn't it? And just look at what happens when there's a hurricane warning, a blizzard, an ice storm. I mean, the next thing you know, the TV crews are in there showing these empty shelves, and so this is actually the fact that we have exchanged our domestic larder for the grocery store down the street is not indicative of security and progress. It's actually indicative of almost a hubris, a faith in ourselves that we can, get along without historically normal procedures, and a faith in this system that somehow this system is magically going to make everything appear. And so while it's easy to think that we're in this new state of euphoric plenty, we're actually in a new state of unprecedented vulnerability, and that's important to understand, and vulnerability not just to volume, but vulnerability to tainting, to pathogenicity, to spoilage, to all these sorts of things, and this new language that we've all learned to say, these new words, Campylobacter, Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella, these kinds of things that weren't even in the lexicon as early as just 30 years ago, are now all over the place. So we haven't even addressed the vulnerability of that. And so the truth is that when a locality is completely dependent on outside sources for food, that is a vulnerable locality. It doesn't matter whether it's in Phoenix or in Bangor, Maine, or in Hong Kong, or your little town in Iowa. You can be surrounded by fertility, but you can't eat soil. So you have to eat what the soil produces. And if your locality is not producing edible stuff, then you're vulnerable.
You mentioned the tainting that can happen in long-term storage. Ever since I was a kid and would visit supermarkets with my parents, and now as an adult as well, I've noticed, and people check your own memories about this, as you walk into the store or out of the store, especially if you ever duck past, like if they say, where's the restroom, what's behind these hanging plastic flaps, you got to go in here and around there. If you ever get to see the back operation, or even if you think about it, sometimes down the main aisles, the foodstuffs being stored right alongside and up next to pesticides, toxic chemicals, whether it's fertilizers or household cleaning chemicals or whatever, and just being intermixed. You can smell the the bug killers and the fertilizers in the same aisle, and right across they got the animal crackers or whatever, and it's just like this is something that you have no visibility of as a consumer, and yet this is part of the history of what you're bringing home and putting in and feeding to your family.
Sure, Cheerios and chlorine. It's a real super combination. So the truth of the matter is, if this is a vulnerable, fragile system, how does local systems save us from that? And so, while it's true that if you live in Indianapolis, chances are your locality is not going to grow bananas and coffee. I get that. And there's always going to be trade. Historically, the spice trade, of course, dominated international trade for many years. Why? Because spices are extremely valuable. And, a little bit goes a long way. so you can transport stuff that's that concentrated or valuable, but you can't justify sending watermelons and squash and things across the country. It's transporting too much water. The stuff is like hauling water across the country. So when I talk about local food systems, I'm not saying that you can't eat anything that's not available in the local area. But if you just brainstorm a minute and say, and just close your eyes and imagine going down your local grocery store aisles, and you say, what could be grown here? Within a radius of just say 50 miles. What could be grown here? And the truth is that the lion's share of everything in there, I do this exercise with people all the time when I go out and speak at foodie conferences and things, and I just have them yell out to me, and when at the end of the day, except for Kleenex and diapers maybe, and a few citrus and coffee, but all the grains, many of the fruits, and of course all of your dairy, all of your meat, all of your animal proteins, pretty much all the vegetables. This can all be grown locally, and it can be it can be you can actually know where this stuff is. So as an individual person, as a family, if you actually have a relationship with somebody in the community who's growing this stuff, when things go south, or if things went south, you would actually have something better than stampeding to the grocery, being another one of thousands of people trying to break in the doors and clean off whatever's in the shelves. You suddenly now can calmly go out and visit your farmer, or pick up the phone and give them a call, and how's your inventory? Are we okay? Blah, blah, blah. And especially if you've been buying in bulk, like a half a beef or a half a hog, and you have, some storage, some on-site storage, things like that. If you've been like canning some meat that doesn't require refrigeration, if the power goes off, whatever, these are things that a prudent person does. One of the most interesting things that I've ever seen and have never forgotten it was down at Williamsburg, in Virginia. Next to Williamsburg is the Powhatan Village, and it's supposed to be a recreation of the way the Native American villages were, when Chief Powhatan, Pocahontas, and all that kind of stuff was going on. And you go there, and they've got these huts. They're not teepees. The iconic, Lakota Sioux that followed the bison with the real straight triangular teepee. These are more kind of squatty domes almost, with bent over saplings and buffalo hide covering them, skins covering them, and just a hole in the center. The chimney was quite a tremendous civilizational development, to get the smoke up out of the house, out of your eyes, out of your lungs. And anyway, smoke goes up in the lattice work of these things. Of course, there are no nails, so all this lattice work is just lashed together with cordage, probably cordage made from venison, from tendons and things, and lashed together. And up in there is hanging, fish and squash and corn and all of the food, the family's food. And it always struck me, it's one room, right? And so when you lie down at night with your beloved and you're looking up into the top, you're actually lying there looking up into your provisions. And, to me that evokes two emotions. One is a profound sense of dependency that my sustenance is I'm dependent on this. I'm very dependent on my ecology. I'm dependent on my surroundings here, what I can gather, what I can grow, what I can hunt, those sorts of things. So there's a tremendous dependency, but there's also the flip side of that is an incredible sense of abundance and provision. That look, there's what we've got for the next 4 months. Isn't that cool? It's right there, right above our heads, and we're proximate to this bounty, this abundance that we've been provided for. And I think there's a real almost a spiritual satiation there to the idea of going and lying down with your beloved and being that proximate to this storehouse of food. There's a great calm and a great sense of completeness and satisfaction in that. And so I think the larder, rather than being some sort of an archaic thing, a larder is a powerful thing. In our house, I've written about this, but when Teresa sends me shopping, I don't go to the grocery store. She gives me a list. Bring up 2 quarts of green beans, 3 quarts of applesauce, a quart of pickled beets, and 1 of canned venison. And I go to the basement. We've got hundreds of quarts of canned goods down there, and I go down and I go shopping. I bring up the food from downstairs. I mean, the truth is that if everything collapsed, we could live very, very nicely for months and months on this storehouse of food. And that isn't indicative of sitting here, living like we're scared of tomorrow. That's not why we do it. We just do it because this is the way humans have lived throughout history, and it's simply a prudent way to live. So, anyway, that's a little of my thinking and my feeling about it, and the why and how this, how we can actually involve ourselves in a participatory way in kind of digging ourselves out of our own insecurity in our current day.
And we were talking before we started the interview about nutrition and how that's connected with healthfulness. Can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on people imagining that some of the resources of the modern world might be unavailable? Food supply is part of it, and the medical system and some of the things that people rely on for wellness for their family. At least in the modern world, we've gotten used to thinking we have to go pay a lot of money for health, but what are some things to remember that have to do with this local food supply and locally grown things and fresh things, and how do you maintain the health and wellness of your family? How do you reduce the risk that you're going to need emergency medical assistance by just simple, prudent things you can do at home too?
Well, first of all, I think that the quality of food changes dramatically when you move to local food systems. It actually packs a lot more punch. And so, for example, I'll just give an example. Let's take eggs. For example, we participated with a study done by Mother Earth News magazine back several years ago, where 12 of us in the country sent our eggs off to a lab to get them analyzed. And I'll just take out one ingredient. They measured about 10 or 12 things. I can't remember what all of them were, but one of them was folic acid, which, if you know anything about nutrition, is real important for pregnant women. And so the regular, supermarket egg, according to the USDA, measures about 48 micrograms of folic acid per egg, and our eggs measured 1,038.
Holy smokes!
Yeah, so I mean, this is not some little 10% deviation or 20% deviation. This is a multiplying kind of deviation. The same thing is true with grass-finished beef, with riboflavin with conjugated linoleic acid, the fats, all the polyunsaturated, saturated. The nutrient profile of non-industrial foodstuffs, from vegetables to meats and dairy and poultry, the nutrient profile is so profoundly different in these smaller systems and more ecologically friendly systems, or consistent systems, let's say, that the product doesn't even look like it's the same thing. And so when you're in a stressed situation, if everything's going great, and the NFL is still on the TV and the house is over your head and everything's hunky dory, some of these nutritional differences are not as essential. But in a stressful situation, if you're trying to fight if you've scratched your hand and you're trying to fight an infection, if you're emotionally distraught about something that's going on, from political to economic to whatever. Anyway, stress on your body, really is where these deficiencies, these differences, tease out and become far more important than when everything's just rocking along smooth. And so while we obviously are a big proponent of eating these foods while everything's hunky-dory, it's even more important when they're not. Now, you build up a head of steam if you eat high-quality foods when you're well. Then you actually build up what we call the immunological terrain, and so anything that's functioning better than normal is able to withstand shocks as it goes through. If you're already breaking down, then certainly you're not as able to withstand shocks. And so one of the best things that people can do for health and wellness to prepare for a downturn, whatever that downturn may be, is to simply maintain your own body's fuel at a very high plane of efficacy. And if that body's plane of fuel is good, and you go into whatever the crisis is, if you go into that crisis on a high plane of functionality, you have a lot better chance of withstanding whatever the shocks are if you go in with some, a little bit of wellness equity in your tank, if you will.
You bet.
Then if you go in already having problems due to drinking 3 soda pops a day and smoking a pack of cigarettes and living on Cheerios and Cocoa Puffs and Velveeta.
That's an interesting aspect that I don't know that anyone we've talked with has mentioned over the past 3.5 years we've been doing this. If I can just recap what you just said, because it just stands out like a beacon here. Everybody talks about storing up supplies. People have talked about storing up tools, whether that's self-defense tools or practical other implements for getting work done. People have talked about storing up precious metals or money and that sort of thing. People have talked about building skills, which is absolutely practical, and building relationships. But I think this is the first time, we even had somebody talked about storing emergency medical supplies, but this is the first time anybody's mentioned about prepping or preparedness means storing up health and wellness in your body's nutritional profile of really being highly, I don't know how to say this exactly, but basically what you were saying about having a very effective and robust nutritionally sound body is one way of starting off any difficult situation, rather than starting from a place of near depletion and on the borderline of ill health. That's very, very profound, and so simple, and so close to home.
Well, it is, and what's wonderful about it is that in a lot of ways, it's one of the more easy things to do. Just because, you're not talking about a radical change of life. You're not even talking about changing your menu. You're talking about maybe changing ingredients, but you're not talking about some of these other, going to a class to develop a skill set or whatever, and so when you talk about bang for the buck, or kick for the effort, I think that actually, creating wellness equity, storing that up in our body's, savings account, if you will, has got to be as good as any, preparation anybody could make for a downturn.
Well, Joel, I think that we covered the main topics that we set out to tonight, as far as what are the advantages of local food, and how does the brittleness of the long distance supply chain, how can we do better than that? Is there anything on this topic that you think you'd like to add for our audience before we sign off?
Well, I think the only thing that might be worth mentioning, we haven't really. I think in times past we've talked about things that you can do for yourself, but I can't help but just reiterate that here as we talk about local food. It's not just about going and buying local food and knowing your local farmer. It's also about doing for yourself what you can do. Now, some people, are in a situation where it's difficult to do much for yourself, but those who can, whether you have from a postage stamp yard to a front patio to a southern exposure on your house that you could build a little solarium on. I mean, this evening at dinner, we're in Virginia. Last week we were ice skating on the pond, and at dinner this evening we had fresh salad out of the garden that's under a double layered cloche. And we had 2 degrees last week, a couple of nights. It's like we were ice skating on the pond, but with this protective cover on it, the vegetables, the greens, the salads in the garden were not killed. No, they're not growing very fast, but they're not dead, and we're enjoying them right now. So there is a tremendous amount that a person can do when you really look at food and nutrition close to home and realize that this is not some pie in the sky out in the space thing, but actually something that's very, very practical. And when we realize that linked up to the practical aspect of storing up health, it becomes even more practical and yields more interest, more dividends than just buying local.
And again, as we've talked about as well, where I thought you might be going with this is it puts you in a position where you can be able to help others. These people that you're in relationships with. You mentioned know your farmer, know your food. These people that you're in relationships with, you can help each other, and by being a small-time producer yourself, it gives you something to barter with that may be different from what other people have as well. So you can help them as you get help your family at the same time. So, well, Joel, we just love having you on here, and we'll have you back again if we certainly can. And just thank you for making this work. I know you had some big storms there this week, and we had trouble getting our communications to work earlier, but we circled back around and got it to work. So just so grateful for having you back here with us again on Reluctant Preppers.
Super. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you.